Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Oh, blessed Thursday to everybody that's joining us tonight at Living Manor Church. You know it's Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time here in the U.S. And this special program, which is always exciting for us here at Science, Philosophy, and Metaphysics, hosted by Dr. Pandit. As we are going on this journey, it has been absolutely, riveting. If you were with us last week, we stayed on like an extra 30 minutes after the broadcast because of the questions and the dialogue that was happening between Dr. Pandit and those of you that were asking questions. So we thank you so much for that. And we are open for that tonight. And Dr. Pandit sure is as well. So we ask you right now if you could please share this link so that others can come in and be a part of the journey along with us. And for those of you who'd like to share even the first broadcast so that people can catch up, please do so here on all of our social media platforms, Power of the Land Ministries, on our Living Manna Church website, as Facebook, wherever you're watching us from, even LinkedIn. Please grab that link and share it with your family and friends. So at this time, we would like to bring Dr. Pandit up front, and we'll begin tonight's program with science, philosophy, and metaphysics.
Hello and welcome again. I'm glad that you joined us, and some of you have been with us a few weeks now. And if you have joined us for the first time, thank you and welcome. Um, we have a lot to cover today, so let's just get on with the slides. All right, here we are. A quick, very sketchy, brief review. As neutral inquirers, that's how we started out. We found a few things. Number one, the existence of God is a rational and scientific claim. And number two, the theory of evolution does not stand reasonable and scientific scrutiny. Relativism, which claims that all the statements on earth are only relatively true, so you can have your truth and I have mine, that does not stand logic. And pluralism, which says that all the religions are basically the same, you'll get to the same destination, whichever one you go, is not supported by the facts. And we saw that. We looked into the writings of the various religions. None of them agree with that. In other words, each of the belief systems, each of the religions claims to be the only way. So, what's the logic? What logic can we use when three, four, five of them, each one saying, I am the only way? We came to the final conclusion of our logical analysis there that there is actually only one of them that is telling the truth when it says it is the only way. And we said it need not be bigger than anyone, need not be ahead of anyone, need not be superior. It just has to be utterly different, unique. In other words, we said if there's only one correct colored marble and I have in my hand 10, four of them purple, three of them blue, two of them green, one red, which is the correct colored marble? It would have to be red because we had already said there would be only one. So it can't be green, there are two of greens. And so we came to the final conclusion on logical analysis that there's only one of them that's telling us the truth when it says it is the only way. We called it the red marble. So identifying the red marble among the religions is the same as identifying God by name. So that's what we're going to try to do from now on and a few weeks from now on. You remember the prime reality question we asked in the first session? What is the thing from which everything else comes? Well, there's a similar prime question here. What is the source of all the doctrines and tenets of beliefs of these various religions? The answer? The written literature. Hence, the first question is regarding the literature of the various religions. And we're going to look at two factors today. Historicity, meaning, is that literature historical by its nature? And then authenticity, and we'll come to each of these right away. First, the historicity of that literature. We're going to look at five religions, and you can see the words there and the literature. Hinduism has the Vedic literature, and then Upanishad, the Bhagavad Gita. Islam has the Quran, Buddhism, by the way, has the largest body of religious literature in the world. There's about, I'd say, more than 300,000 pages. Half of them have not been translated from the original Pali and Sanskrit yet. Christianity, Jesus, the Bible is the literature. Judaism, it's actually not just the Old Testament, it's the Talmud. Talmud's a study, Talmud Torah, study of the Torah. That's actually the core, although the Old Testament also is taken to be a part of that literature. So we're going to look at the literature. Ancient literature is classified into four broad categories. Number one, folk tale, two, legend, three, myth, and four, historical. Let's look at the features of each of these. Folktale, there's no attempt to state a real true story. Everybody knows that. The sun is smiling, the wind is going to give you a little secret, and the birds and the animals have gotten together for a committee meeting. They know it's not true. They're bringing out a lesson or a moral. So the story in a tale, folk tale, is not true. How about legend? It's probably started out as a real story, true story. And then the key is that highlighted word on the screen, changes. Changes creep in over time, exaggerations, embellishments to superhuman proportions. And an ordinary guy becomes superhuman and then maybe divine. And the changes begin when? Generations after the event, when there's no eyewitness to challenge your change. The time period to make a legend is centuries. We do not make a legend in the same generation as the event. Myth is so far back in history that it is generally accepted as somebody's imagination, although it may not be. Just accept it that way. The story is probably not true. The characters probably are fictitious. It's just a big question because it's so far back and it usually involves the world of gods and goddesses and flights of imagination. The time period to form a myth is many, many centuries and even millennia, thousands of years. So, with this description, let's look at the writings themselves. Well, one more historical, we forgot that. That is the most credible of all this classification. Here, the attempt is to really state it as it happened. No additions, no core changes. By the way, all ancient writings have changes. The question is, does it change the actual narrative, the, the meat of the story? And the closer to the event that it's written, the greater the credibility. You see some letters there on the screen, EV. EV means the event. When there's an unusual event, the community makes it into a story that it wants to hold on to. And then it passes it on from generation to generation. It's called the oral tradition, OT. And then after a few generations, somebody says we might forget details, so let's write it down. It becomes RWT, written tradition. We do not have any original manuscript that was originally written down. So we look at what is EM, earliest manuscript. Those dashes there, they are the gaps. If the gaps are really wide, the credibility comes down. Whereas if the gaps are small, the credibility of that writing goes up. So that's the meaning of historical. So let's look at the writings. Hinduism, the Vedic texts are the earliest of the Vedas. Rig Veda is the earliest, and then followed by an anthology called the Upanishads, and the epic, the big story called the Ramayana, in whom the hero is Rama, the seventh incarnate of the god Vishnu. Following that is the Mahabharata, another long big story, and there the hero is Krishna, the eighth incarnate of the god Vishnu. And in the Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita, which is the most oft quoted part of the literature of the Hindus. Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavat means God, Gita is song. The discussion between Arjuna, who is on the battlefield, and Krishna, who are talking and describing their various duties, just like rules and judgments and commands. Look at the statement there. Lord Krishna first spoke Bhagavad Gita to the sun god some hundreds of millions of years ago. Now, that is definitely too far back for any of us to go. It is said that the information was lost to the human race and came back during the battle of Kurukshetra. That is when Arjuna and Krishna actually had that talk, the Bhagavad Gita. That was the year 3102 BC, the start of this age. This is the fourth age, or the four ages of the Hindus. That is when it came back. 5,000 years ago is still a long ways back. And so it's difficult to check it out. And therefore, this is the words from the ultimate encyclopedia of mythology. Krishna, according to Hindu mythology, is an avatar or an incarnate of Vishnu, the preserver of the universe. So we don't say it's wrong or it's horrible. We're just saying it is a likely mythological story, the stories of the Hindu epics. How about Buddhism? I'm going to state four sentences now in chronological order, and let's see if you can classify this. The first statement, the humanity of the Buddha is also expressed by a Theravada monk. A Theravada monk is the one who lived at the time of Gautama Buddha, and he wrote this out. Was he not born at Lumbini? Did he not complete existence at Kusinara? In other words, he's describing him as an ordinary human. He was born here and he died here. Sentence 2, soon after the passing of the master, next generation has come, a change began to set in. Number 3, at the beginning of the Christian era, 500 years have gone by now, the transcendental nature, the otherworldly nature, the superhuman nature of the Buddha became more and more pronounced. And then in one of the most important pieces of Mahayana literature, the early part of Buddhism is called Hinayana, the later part is called Mahayana. We won't go into the details of that, except to say that in this Mahayana literature, which came on 700 to 1,000 years later, there's not much of the man left in the Buddha. He is now an exalted being who has lived for countless ages in the past and will continue to live forever. Did you see the change? When it was first written down, he was an ordinary man, born here, died here. 700 years later, no, he wasn't born here, he always lived. And he didn't die here, he always will live. That change, what would you think would classify the story? I hope you said legend because the change was there. And the legend that changes a real story into a made up or a fabricated one in which a person is lifted up from ordinary circumstances to superhuman and then even to divine. Judaism, there are 39 books and over 20 different authors living at vastly different periods of history. Some writings in the Old Testament appear questionable, others are accurately historical. So I just left it unclassified for now. Islam, the Quran was put together in writing by 652 CE, Common Era, same as AD, within 20 years of Muhammad's life. And the writing was confined to one generation, but Muhammad did not write it. Most Muslims, ordinary, the regular ones, think that Muhammad wrote it, but he did not. In fact, it was written down years after Muhammad. And Muhammad is the only person who is an inspired individual according to Muslim Islamic tradition. Therefore, who wrote it down then if he is gone? Uninspired individuals wrote it down. By the way, it was compiled twice. Many people do not know that there is a history of the Quran. The Muslims usually say Allah spoke and it became the Quran. But between Allah speaking and the message sent through Angel Jibril to Muhammad and the actual writing, there is a history. That's a human history. And one must look into the human history for it to make real, ordinary sense to us. It was compiled twice, by the way. Why compiled? Do you know why Muhammad did not write it? One of the reasons they say is he was actually illiterate. And that's why it's called the Quran. The Quran in Arabic means the recitation. He didn't write, he recited. And then so what he said was brought together after a few years, put together, compiled. It was compiled two times, 18 years apart. And after the second compilation, All the manuscripts were ordered destroyed by the then caliph, whose name was Uthman, the third caliph. So, really, today, nobody can vouch that what is there in the Quran today is actually what Muhammad said, because all the manuscripts are destroyed. Christianity, the earliest manuscripts, anywhere from 114 to 134 AD, they were written within 20 to 50 years, the life of Jesus, and confined to one generation. No core changes. Yes, bits and changes are there, but no core changes of the actual story. One more thing. We think that the writings in the Bible are the earliest Christian writing. No, the earliest Christian writing was found by Eliezer Sukenik, professor at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, who found two ossuaries. Ossuaries are receptacles, pots, in which you put the dead man's bones and then bury the pot itself. On that pot, these two ossuaries are found the earliest Christian writing. They're dated about 41 AD. That's within 10 years of the life of Jesus. One of them reads Jesus God on, it's written down. The other one, Jesus Ascended One. So can you see the difference? It took 700 to 1,000 years for Buddha to become a godlike being. Here in 10 years, we have gone from event to oral tradition to written tradition, not just to the earliest manuscript, but the actual writing itself. So we can call it the original manuscript. And all the while as God, no change. In other words, this is the only writing that has no gap at all. So we can already say, I'm going to quote now three well-known archaeologists. The first one is Sir William Albright, an American archaeologist. He says, we can already say emphatically that there is no longer any solid basis for dating any book of the New Testament after about AD 80, except the book of Revelation. Nelson Gluck, look at this. He's a Jewish archaeologist. Just look at the strength of this statement. It may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference. The third archaeologist is Sir William Ramsay, a British archaeologist, arguably the greatest of them. Look at his words. Luke's history is unsurpassed in respect of its trustworthiness. This author should be placed along with the very greatest of historians, not religious historians, greatest of historians. You may press the words of Luke in a degree beyond any other historians, and they stand the keenest scrutiny and the hardest treatment. And he said this after 30 years of comparing his archaeological findings with Luke's writings. In all, Luke names 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands without an error. Did you say, wow? I hope you did. That's amazing. Everything correct. These statements are not mere opinions based on hearsay, but they are conclusions based on carefully examining the facts that bear upon the subject that we are looking. We should all be able to give credit where credit is due. Luke wrote one gospel and the main historical piece about the early Christians. So, what are we saying? The New Testament is solidly historical in type and nature. Let's take a break. All right. So we found the New Testament historical, solidly historical. But now we're going to compare it with other things. Because when you look at a historical piece of literature, there are three factors that may be considered when assessing the credibility. It's historical, but how credible is it? One, we already saw the gaps between the event, oral tradition, written tradition, the earliest manuscript. We found that there's no gaps. Number two, the number of manuscripts that back the writing. Why do we look at the number of manuscripts? Because if there are only just one or two or three, one in your office here and one at home and one in your shop out there, then some people who know about these manuscripts might say, hey, I don't like what is in page 4, paragraph 3. Let's go and change it. And you have to change it in all of them. Then nobody will know that you have changed it and it has been corrupted. You have to go to all. So to do all of them, if they are small in number, you can possibly do it. But if there are 20 and 50 of them here, there, this town, next continent, next country, it's difficult to go to all of them and change them all so that nobody catches you doing the change. So the number of manuscripts is a pointer to the credibility of the reliability of the text. In other words, the text has stayed the same. That's the meaning of the number of manuscripts. And number 3, the proximity of the authors. Where were the authors? Were the authors anywhere close by the story? Or were they really separated in terms of distance, maybe in the next town, maybe the next country, maybe next continent? Or separated by time, maybe the next generation or 3 generations later? These 3 factors are what we're going to look at in our comparison with writings that are well known and accepted all over the world as historical writings. There are 3 of them: Caesar's Gallic Wars, Herodotus' History, Tacitus' Annals, and we're going to look at these 3 factors. First, the gaps. Look at the gap. Caesar's Gallic Wars was written in 100 BC, and the earliest manuscript we have is 900 AD, a gap of 1,000 years. Herodotus' History has a gap of 1,300 years. Tacitus' Annals has a gap of 1,000 years. By the way, these names are really well known, well respected. But look at the gaps. You can actually quote these authors doing your MAs and PhDs in a department of history. In other words, despite the gap, they're all considered historical pieces of literature. Look at the New Testament. 20 years. Compare this, 1,000 to 20. If you can accept 1,000 years in which nobody can vouch whether anything was added or deleted or modified and still consider it historical, you should be able to give credit where it is due. 20 to 50 years, solidly historical. The number of manuscripts, look at that. 10 manuscripts for Gaelic Wars, 8 for history of Herodotus' History, and 20 for Tacitus' Annals. The champion of Greek literature is Homer's Iliad, 643 manuscripts. Look at the New Testament, 5,686 manuscripts. I really hope you said, wow. And these are only the Greek manuscripts. If you add the Arabic and the Armenian and the Coptic and the Latin and all of them, do you know how many manuscripts actually back the New Testament? 24,900. Compare that with a 10 and 8 and 20. Are you willing to give credit where it is due? Not because you like the book, but because the features allow us to state the truth of the matter. The third one is, where were the authors? Look at the statement here. Peter says, we did not follow fables, but were what? Eyewitnesses. They're right there watching what's happening. John says the same thing. From that hour, that disciple, he himself, took her, Mary, to his own home. So he's writing about himself in his writings. Luke says this, we sailed over the sea. We came to Myra. So where are these authors? They were not just close by. They were part of the story. And you cannot get any closer than inside the story, my friends. No other ancient book has anything like such early and plentiful testimony to its text, and no unbiased scholar would deny that the text that has come down to us is substantially sound. In the variety and fullness of the evidence on which it rests, the texts of the New Testament stands absolutely and unapproachably alone among ancient prose writings. Not ancient religious prose, all writings, beginning from the Sumerians and the Mayans and the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Egyptians and the Indian and the Chinese and the Greek and the Romans. Take all the writings and put them on the table. This bitty little book called the New Testament will stand up as the best attested historical piece of literature in the world. Did you know that? Yes, despite all the the attacks and the scorn and the jeers regarding all the miracles, no, if you look at the features of the book, it is the best historical literature in the world. To be skeptical of the resultant text of the New Testament books is to allow all of classical antiquity to slip into obscurity, for no document of the ancient period are as well attested bibliographically as the New Testament. Yes, if you do not want this, you will discard it. You'll have to discard the pharaohs, Chinese dynasties, Babylon, Cyrus the Great, Alexander the Great, Caesar, Augustus, Julius Caesar. Everyone will go off. This is actually the reference because it is the best attested piece of literature. We mustn't ask whether others attest this. We must ask whether this attests the others. It is so solidly historical. And everyone who has looked at it has actually agreed. And I have agreed for the simple reason that the features do say so. While the Quran and the New Testament are historical in nature according to the criteria that we applied, the New Testament clearly has the highest credibility and integrity of text. So, what are we supposed to do according to Socrates? We're supposed to go where the argument leads and give credit where it is due. Let's take another break. All right, let's get to the next one. We said authenticity. Here's the question. Does the writing or the literature contain and describe a test that an inquirer could use to determine its authenticity? What do we mean by authenticity? Evidence that the message came to the human race from there, from a source that could be classed supernatural. Is there any test? Hinduism, we have to accept it as it is, otherwise, there's no point in trying to understand the Bhagavad Gita and its speaker, Lord Krishna. There's no test. Take it or leave it. Similarly, in Buddhism, absolute truth is unconditional, undeterminate, and beyond thought and word. If it's beyond thought and word, you can't test it. So, both Hinduism and Buddhism do not point to any test within the literature, but they do point to a test. Experience in life as a Hindu or a Buddhist. Well, it's reasonable and a good test, but it can't be used to identify the unique one. Why? Because there are already two of them saying the same thing, and also all religions make this as a claim. Every religion says you got to test it in life, not just read about it. And number three, it's impossible to experience each of them. So actually, experience a good test, but it's an impractical test. Islam does have a test. Here's the challenge. Produce one chapter comparable to you, comparable to it, the Quran. Call upon your idols to assist you if what you say is true. But if you fail, as you are sure to fail, in other words, you can never write anything like the Quran. If men and jinn are creatures between angels and human, combined to produce a book akin to this Quran, they would surely fail to produce its like. Not just a book, 10 chapters, not just 10 chapters, even one chapter. So, hey, that's a test. The test is, can anyone write like this Quran? Can you produce something like the Quran? So it was a test. And actually, I was quite happy because the other religions didn't give a test. At least this is giving a test. But when I began to do it, I realized I could not, you cannot do a test the way the Quran is challenging you because of four factors. It does not say what aspect to be equaled. If you ask me to equal so and so, you must tell me how. Should I equal him in height or weight or grades or looks or wealth or physical prowess? What? If you don't tell me the facet or the aspect to be equaled, then I can choose whatever and I want and I can always win. So no, you must clearly describe what aspect. Don't say just equal. In what aspect? It doesn't say so. Number two, What's the method of comparison? Subjective, objective? Number three, who will be the judge? That's not stated. So if you don't state the judge, well, then the person who's doing it is the judge. And in that case, if I am the judge, then the game is up. I have found writing that are, I think, beautiful. You can't say it's less than the Quran. Number four, what language? The Quran came down from Allah, from a mother book kept in heaven, and that mother book is in Arabic. And that is why the Quran came down to the human race in Arabic. So if you want to equal that, you must write in Arabic. But the Quranic Arabic is very peculiar, and it is a literary type of Arabic which ordinary Arabians cannot really speak. In fact, less than 1% of humans know the Quranic Arabic. So 99% like you and I can't do the test. So these four factors showed me that it is a test, but it is not practical. It's not a universal test. If it is not practical and universal, it really is not a test. I'm going to put the Christians and the Judaic literature together, and you'll see why. So it's the Judeo-Christian claim now of a test. But before I get to it, I'm going to read a sentence, and it's called Scientific Determinism. It was written out by a French brilliant scientist, Pierre-Simon Laplace. He was so brilliant that some of his statements and his ideas came down to even the time when I was doing medicine. We had to learn Laplace's laws, and he lived hundreds of years ago. He made this statement, and he, by the way, he was known as the Sir Isaac Newton of France. I mean, that's a big title, Sir Isaac Newton of France. So Isaac Newton, by the way, was a Christian churchgoer. Pierre-Simon Laplace was a staunch atheist. And atheists do not agree to a mind beyond the human mind. Human mind, that's the limit. There's nothing beyond that. But in this statement, he describes an intellect that is way beyond. I'm not sure why, but he did. And so I'm going to read the statement, and then I'm going to tell you what he means by the big long sentence here. I'm going to read it out to you. We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of its past and the cause of its future. An intellect which at a certain moment would know all the forces that set nature in motion and all positions of all items of which nature is composed. If this intellect were also vast enough to submit this data for analysis, it would embrace in a single formula the movements of the greatest bodies of the universe and those of the tiniest atom. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain, and the future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. So what is it saying? The sentence is like this. If there's an intellect who knows every atom and molecule in this cell phone, and he knows all the properties of every atom inside there, and he knows all the laws that govern every particle in this cell phone, then to that intellect that knows all of this, nothing would be uncertain. He could go back 100 years and he will tell you where every atom was 100 years ago. They were not here, somewhere, but he'll tell you where they are. Furthermore, he can look 100 years hence because he knows every particle, he knows all the laws that govern it, he knows all the properties of every particle. He can tell you where every atom will be 100 years from now. That is what he is saying. If there was such an intellect who knew every particle and who knew every law and every properties of every particle, then nothing would be uncertain. Present, past, future, all present before his eyes. How do we test this intellect? Suppose he sat down here and said, I am the intellect. How will you and I test him? Well, we could by one simple way. We can ask this intellect, can you tell us what will happen tomorrow? Can you tell us what will happen next week? How about next month? Well, next year, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And if every one of those predictions that he makes comes true, tomorrow, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, 10 years, then we might be able to say, hey, I think we have identified this intellect. Because nothing is uncertain. He can tell the future and the past, just like today. Do you know that this is exactly the Judeo Christian test that is in it to test it out? Here's the test. Present your case, says the Lord. Let them bring forth and show us what will happen. Declare to us things to come, that we may know hereafter. Show us the thing that we to come hereafter, that we may know that you are God. We may know that you are that intellect. You must say it beforehand. It's called predictive prophecy. Now, there's an atheist. His name is Douglas Kruger. He said, just stating a prophecy doesn't make it a real prophecy. 5 things should be clear about it. Number one, it should be clear, not fuzzy wuzzy. Number two, it should be unusual. Number three, it should be made prior to the event. Of course, that's why it's called prophecy. Number four, it should not be the sort that will be an educated guess, like, looking at the stock market trends and then making a prediction. No. Number five, it should not be staged or manipulated to intentionally cause it to be fulfilled. 5 criteria, to which I added a sixth. It should not be by chance. In other words, it would be outside statistical probability. So now we're going to look and see whether there are any prophecies like this. Take a break before we go into the prophecy. All right, let's get to a prophecy. Here's one. Jeremiah, in chapter 51 of his book, in verse 33, talks of Babylon, and he says, I will make her springs dry. And next verse he says, Babylon shall become a heap without an inhabitant. Now, when he wrote this, Babylon was the most fortified city in the world. Our walls are about a foot, 18 inches, 20 inches thick. You know how thick the walls of Babylon? Today you can actually go and look and measure out. It's a double wall. The total width, 87 feet thick, the wall. Do you know how high it went? I don't know where you are sitting. For me, my roof is about 12 feet. How high did the walls of Babylon go? 175 to 300 feet. And you can't come anywhere close by to climb on that wall because the walls were surrounded by a moat. A moat is a ditch of water. And they say that the ditch was equal in volume to the wall. Huge moat. You couldn't come anywhere close by. So how do you beat a city like this? Well, there could be one way, and that's lay siege. In other words, get your soldiers to stand at the gate and don't let anybody go in and out, because your food is out there in the farmlands outside the city, and it has to be brought in, and then you'll have food. So you lay siege. Don't let any food come in. And after some months, your rations have run out, and then you'll come out with a white flag. Give up. That's the meaning of laying siege. Why would Babylonians laugh at anyone wanting to lay siege? Because siege just don't last for more than 1 year, 2 years, 2.5 maximum years of staying siege. They would really taunt you if you were like trying to lay siege to Babylon, because in the storehouses of Babylon, there was enough food for all the inhabitants for a period of 20 years. An impregnable city, just can't be defeated. But the prophecy was that it would be defeated and become a heap. Nobody would live there. Do you know that's exactly what happened? Cyrus was winning all his wars. Now, Cyrus was a Medo-Persian. He was winning all his wars. And now he came to Babylon and he said, if I get Babylon, Babylon was the capital of the Babylonian Empire. He said, if I get Babylon, I'll be world empire. Well, I'll be world emperor. So let me get Babylon. So how to get it? So he sent his scouts this way and that way. Boy, just totally impregnable. No way to get it. So he said he would himself do a little scouting. So on one of his journeys around the city, by the way, Babylon sits on the river Euphrates. The river Euphrates runs one side and comes clean out on the other side. And that's Babylon sitting there. And the river Euphrates has tributaries and distributaries. And when Cyrus was passing through one of them, the current was too hard for his horse, and it swung him out and killed his horse. He somehow swam to safety, but he was so angry with the river because the river killed my horse. So he called his generals and said, I want this river dry. Oh, wow, how do you do that? Well, the captains look at each other and said, well, he wants it dry, so how do we do it? Well, Herodotus, in writing history, says how they did it. They dug 80 to 300 small aqueducts paralleling the river and drained it because Cyrus wanted it drained. And when it was drained, Cyrus saw his way into the city. How? On the river bed. And Babylon fell in one night without a drop of bloodshed. As soon as he came in, the people said, you are our king. And they completely discarded their own king. Cyrus, you are our king. Cyrus became king immediately. But slowly, the city deteriorated over the years. And today, few words evoke as many images of ancient decadence, glory, and prophetic doom as does Babylon. Yet the actual place, 50 miles south of Baghdad, is flat, hot, next word, deserted. Didn't that, wasn't that the words of Jeremiah way back? Babylon shall become a heap without an inhabitant. It became a heap, deserted. Today, 2,500 years later. Look, you don't have to be a believer. You just have to have a little money and buy a plane ticket to Baghdad. And if you go there, even today, you can go and see the ruins of Babylon. There are two sets of bricks out there, the original ones and the ones by Saddam Hussein, who wanted to rebuild the city because he wanted to be the modern Nebuchadnezzar. But it's gone. No Arab will pitch his tent there. Nobody lives there. 2,500 years. That prophecy still stands. How about the birthplace? It was written 500, 600 years before that somebody would be born in Bethlehem, not just Bethlehem Ephrata. And when we look at the story of Jesus, yes, he was born in Bethlehem Ephrata. There are two Bethlehems, but he was not born in the other Bethlehem. He was born in Ephrata, which was the prediction. When a person is thirsty, what do you give? Now, this was written 1,000 years earlier. It said somebody would be thirsty and he would say, I thirst. And the people would give him vinegar to drink. And that's exactly the fulfillment. He said, I thirst, and they filled a sponge with sour wine, which is vinegar, and put it to his mouth. Amazing. How many prophecies do you think you would need to say, okay, I think we've identified Laplace's intellect. I thought, 10 good ones will be sufficient. I mean, 10 unusual ones. First of all, that one about Babylon itself is mind-boggling. 10, 12. Scholars report that they have identified 500 prophecies in the Judeo-Christian scriptures. 322 refer to a single individual, Jesus the Christ. 24 of them, not the 10 and 12 that I wanted, 24 of them were fulfilled in one weekend, the last weekend of his life. Statistics, I said number 6, it should be outside of statistical probability, so it didn't happen by chance. Here's something to think about. Peter Stoner considers 48 prophecies and reports. We find the chance that any one man fulfilled 48. Remember, he fulfilled 300. But if you fulfill 48 prophecies, the chances of fulfilling it is 1 chance in 10 to the power of 157. That's a huge number. Look at the number that we compare it with. The elementary particles in the universe is 10 to the power of 84. And the total time in seconds, according to the estimates of the Big Bang, is 10 to the power of 18. And the estimated interactions by mathematicians who tell us how many interactions per second, 10 to the power of 20. So 10 to the power of 84 elementary particles lasting 10 to the power of 18 seconds, and interacting 10 to the power of 20 times a second. The total chance of the universe gives us is 10 to the power of 122. So, if the total number of chances provided by the entire universe since its inception, according to the standard model, is 10 to the power of 122, and the number of chances required for the same individual to fulfill just 48 prophecies is 10 to the power of 157, it would require a series of 10 to the power of 35 consecutive universes, not just one universe like we have here of, say, 15 billion years. 35. See that number on the screen? That many zeros, that many universes you need until you'll find one man who accomplished 48 of them. Statistically, utterly impossible. So the sixth criterion that I had mentioned was more than fulfilled. So the prophecies were not by random chance, they were real prophecies. Here are two statements. One by Pierre Simon Laplace, an atheist, avowed, staunch atheist, and the other, a real believer. Some people even account her as a prophetess. Look at the words. I've highlighted the words, and I want you to see the similarity. For such an intellect, nothing would be uncertain. The future, just like the past, would be present before its eyes. And here the statement by this believer: He that ruleth in the heavens, that intellect, is the one who sees, same as eyes, the end from the beginning, the one before whom the mysteries of the past, the word past is there, future is there, alike is there. All five words are exactly the same in both the sentences. So, what do we mean by saying that? We mean that when multiple sources have concurring data, we have to believe it. A brilliant atheistic scientist saying the same thing as a respected believer, written down in ancient literature and verifiable by secular history, we have to give credit where it is due. So, what is Judeo-Christian book? It's the best attested historical literature, least gaps in time, greatest manuscript evidence, and authors were part of the story, not just close by. And the only writing that permits an open test for possible supernatural origin. Could these point to the red marble regarding the book? Q&A.
I thought last week was a mouthful. This week, you've added to the consumption of a lot of information when it comes to going through this journey. We have definitely several questions that we want to bring to your attention. And so let's go with the very first one. Then I'm just going to go in order here. But first, I want to thank everybody that's watching. Thank you so much. Some of you have been saying where you're watching from. We have someone watching from New Zealand. Someone's watching from New Zealand, as well as we have someone, Claudia, is watching from Canada. So thank you guys so much for being here and from tuning in from all over the country, and it looks like different parts of the world as well. So here we are. We are going to start with, actually, Dr. Pandit will go with, oh, here. Start. This is from Deborah Haling, and Deborah says, we know that history backs up what the Bible says. Does history do the same thing with other writings, example, the Quran, etc.?
I'm not sure what you mean by history backs up. In other words, is the writing historical? If that's what you're saying, then we saw that the New Testament is historical, and so is the Quran. In other words, we do not say the Quran is not historical, it is historical. So when we look at the Quran, we examine it in some other ways, but we acknowledge that it is historical. In other words, the writing has the features of being a historical piece of literature. That is not the case with Buddhist literature, because that's a legendary piece of literature. It is not the same as the Hindu literature, which is more mythological. So, yes, the New Testament is backed by history. In other words, are you calling it secular history? Because I'd like to caution us, history is history, whether it's secular or religious, it makes no difference. If the features of historicity are there, you should have to call it history, whether you like it or not. So, does history back it? In other words, is the writing historical? The New Testament is. The Old Testament, we look at it in other ways as well, but other writings are also historical. But other writings do not have that test. Remember, just because it's historical doesn't mean it came from God. It's just historical. So it's got those features. That's why the second question is so important. It's not only historical, it gives you a test. You can check it out, whether it came from that realm, so that it gives us some confidence that it's historical. We can check it out, and we can also check it out by testing whether it could have come from the other realm.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, our next question is going to come from Adrian M. It actually is a compliment, but also a question for you personally, Dr. Pandit, if that's okay. All right. All right, Adrian says, I'm very impressed, Dr. Pandit, with respect to all with the respect you pay to all of the faiths. Wow. But I want to know what faith you had as a child and what did you grow up believing?
It's a very good question. I grew up as a Christian in India. India is very diverse. It's the largest Hindu population in the world, and arguably the second largest Muslim population in the world. There are more Muslims in India than the whole Arabian Peninsula put together. Buddhism was born there, Jainism, Sikhism, Zoroastrianism, and that's a crucible in which you grow up. So it doesn't matter where you started, actually. It matters what kind of a search you did. Was it a real type of a search in which you looked for evidence, or just sat where you were and just let bias hold sway over you? So, yes, as a Christian, but as a Christian, I had to put it away to do this test and this search. And however successful I was there with that, you decide. I believe I was able to put it aside for the simple reason I really wanted to know. I desperately want to know. I want to know whether am I sitting on the right way or am I headed the wrong direction. So starting out, you can start wherever, but it now depends on whether you can honestly do a search. And I think I'm showing you evidence that it was a good search that I did.
Hmm. Awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, our next question is coming from Michelle Watson Grant. Michelle, how are you? Um, Michelle asked the question, what date range were all the NT, the New Testament manuscripts written?
The books themselves were started. By the way, we think that the Gospels were written first. No, it is the writings of Paul that predate the Gospel. So, in other words, the the tradition was already set. The oral tradition was set by the time Paul started, and he started writing within 20 to 30 years. The earliest writing is the book of Galatians, most likely AD 50 or around somewhere there, 48 to 50. And the latest one would be probably the book of John, the Revelator, going into the 80s. But they were all written in one generation, if that was your question.
Okay, and actually, there's a question that kind of comes behind that one, sort of within the same, based off of how you answered, Dr. Panda. What about the order of the New Testament? Was how Paul's writings actually, or I guess you want to say, were Paul's writings actually come after Jude? So I
No,
think you were.
yeah, Paul's writings were predated the Gospels.
Mm-hmm.
So the New Testament is not really written chronologically. Galatians is first, and then later on comes the Gospels and each of those writings. I mean, they were written actually down. Okay? So, what we do know then, what Paul wrote down about Jesus was already set by the time he wrote it down. So, it was already set, he wrote it down, and what was set then was written by the other writers of the Gospels.
Okay. All right. Okay. There seems to be. Okay. I see Leslie in New Z. I hear you. I
There's one
hear what you were
on the
saying.
chat there. Are there
Yes.
prophecies in other religions' text?
I'm coming to that one too. Yeah.
Okay,
I
fine.
was. Yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
There we go.
All
Mm-hmm.
right. Are
All
there
right.
prophecies in other religions' texts? Yes, there are. But the word predictive prophecy has certain features to it which are pretty strict. The word predictive prophecy means once you make the prediction, you can check when it was made, and you can also check the prediction when it was fulfilled. Both of them should be there, then it can be called a legitimate predictive prophecy. Now, there are prophecies in other religions, very few, but there are. For example, Muhammad did prophesy that Mecca would be burned. And he also specifically said a certain person there, his name was Abu Lahab, he will be burned, and his wife also will be burned. And then he takes his army and burns Mecca. So that is not really a solid prophecy because he himself is fulfilling it. And remember Douglas Kruger, he said, you shouldn't do it yourself. So that's not a real good prophecy. And it should not be the kind that will be an educated guess. There's another prophecy that Muhammad made about which nation would really win the war. Now, that's only two or three nations involved, so the statistical probability is only so small, either this one or that one. So it's not really so impressive as a real prophecy. And he did it within a few years. It's not like hundreds of years earlier. So yes, in the Quran and in the Islamic writings there are prophecies. Hindus also have a prophecy. I mentioned their cyclic nature of time of the way they compute time. We are in the fourth age, Yuga age. Three have gone by, fourth. The time for each is clearly written. These many years each. So now our Yuga is called Kali Yuga. There's a prophecy, each of them now. It started in 3102 BC at that battle, which started this whole Yuga, this whole age. 5,000 years ago. So you know how long now it is going to last? 27,000 years. So how are you going to check that out? It's a prophecy, but you can't check it out. So it can't be classified as a predictive prophecy. You should see the prediction plus the fulfillment. So yes, there are prophecies, but nothing like what is in the Judeo-Christian scriptures where you can go and check it out, not just one or two or three, hundreds. There's no other text that has this kind of prophecies.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I have a question based off of. Okay. Okay. Here we go. This is. I think Michelle may be coming in. Michelle asked another question. And the question is, what was the date range? The other 20,000 New Testament manuscripts, the Arabic, Coptic, etc., written close to the Greek.
The date when you deal with the number of manuscripts doesn't matter at all. It's where they are. In other words, if there are 5, you can go and change all of them. If there are 20, it doesn't matter when you wrote them out. Even if they copied from the original, it doesn't really matter because there are so many now. If you want to change the text, you have to go change all of them. And that's the key regarding the number, not when it was written. When it can be written anytime. In fact, the earlier manuscripts were written, like I said, within the same generation, but all these other manuscripts were written much, much later. But today we have that many manuscripts spread out all over, each copying from the other, but is separate. So when you have 5, 10, 15, the number goes up. As the number goes up, the credibility goes up. It does not matter when these manuscripts are written, except for the earliest manuscript. So the earliest manuscript for Christian literature is not a manuscript, it's on the ossuaries, remember? It's the earliest writing we have, and it is not even a manuscript, it's not even the earliest it is the actual writing, the original writing within 10 years of Jesus' life. That's an amazing piece of information regarding this book.
Okay, thank you so much, Michelle, for that. And she said, okay, cool, thanks for clarifying. And she has, so they were copies.
Manuscripts were handwritten copies. That's why they're called manuscripts.
Awesome. I do have a question based off of one of the slides you talked about the earlier, the authentic writing based in Arabic, and that Arabic is supposed to be the original language. This is me paraphrasing. But my question to you is, how would someone know it would be? What would verify the fact that they think it's Arabic? Because when we go back to Old Testament writings in terms of the Tower of Babel and the description of the languages being broken up, even if you don't believe in Scripture, my question is, what is the explanation about the different languages that people have across the globe?
I didn't quite get the question. Are you
Well,
asking how do
is
we?
there yeah, so it's in various uh, belief systems, is there any explanation as to the origins of why there is more than one language? We're not
Oh
all
no, no,
speaking.
no, no, no.
Okay.
Only the Old Testament writes it out. And actually, when you look at the history of how the Earth's population migrated, today's population studies shows, and in fact, the latest in science, anthropological studies show that the Earth's population came out, they say the title or the word they use is out of Africa. And if you look at out of Africa, it's at the northern part of Africa. Now, if you get out from the northern part of Africa and have to go to the world, you'll have to go by Palestine. So when you look at that trajectory of the population of the earth being populated, areas being populated, had to go out from there. So it's not very far from actually Palestine. So the population studies do show they went out from there. Same thing with language. The language also seems to be coming out from there. So there are pointers, they're not proofs, but they are pointers that what the history is stated in the 10th and 11th chapter of Genesis is pretty authentic. It's called the Table of Nations if you go there. And if you look at those, that seems to be exactly how the population went on. By the way, the question of population, do you know, if we really start with the secular population studies, you start at a point and then you see how the population expands. And if you go that many years back, then if you calculate what the population should be today, it's supposed to be huge. So what do they do to make it fit with today's population? They say that there had to be a catastrophe in which the population became big and then suddenly became small, and then from that small number we got today's population. Does that ring a bell? Yes, it's a catastrophe that happened. It is something that knocked the whole population down to a small number, and then from there it came up. So the trajectory, the graph that you draw is exactly the same.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because right behind that, my question to you about the languages was going to be talking about the flood. Okay. Um, I have not been. Obviously, I've not been there, but I've heard that there's some historical, geological maps that point to this humongous boat that is on a mountain in Turkey, that they really don't have really any explanation how something this mammoth would be this high. Um, so it would point to, as you said, something catastrophic happened. You just don't have a boat landing that high on a mountain and not have something saying something happened. This
Yeah,
is
but
without scripture, so something there has to be an explanation for that.
that is true. But when you use the word boat, that is questionable because the structure is not described. The structure, it is so vague. The picture that some have taken are very vague, but it is the mountains on in northern Turkey, and it does point to something being there. But the skeptics would say that something can be explained by some natural phenomena as well. So until such time as we get some more information, we will have say there are two theories, and we shouldn't discard either of them, because one, it says that something went up there and was stated there, and there was an Armenian family, boy and uncle, I think, and father, who did climb up. Today, that place is always snowbound, so we can't get there. But there was a particularly warm summer, and this father and son, or grandfather and son, went up there, and they did see something, and it seemed like a wooden structure. So that's all we know about it. But still, what would a wooden structure be doing up there? And the descriptions of that seem to suggest there are no metal stuff on that structure. All the joints were just wooden. So again, it fits this, but we should not be too dogmatic on that one point. If you look for evidences for the flood, then what we should look at is other evidences in in the land to show that there was a huge deluge at one time, and the evidences of that are left on the surface of the earth.
Mm.
So those evidences would be stronger than finding or saying that there's a wooden structure up there, with the skeptics saying, well, it could have been there with another reason or with another explanation.
Got you. Got you. Okay, we have two more questions. We'll go ahead and take those. Um, it says the first one is this one's from Little Juan, and oh, I'm sorry. Let me post this for everyone to see. I apologize for that. Good day, ma'am, sir. Well, good evening. Just want to ask about quote unquote premonition. Is there a biblical truth about this, or just a pagan slash superstition line of thoughts?
Do you know what the question is? Is it about premonition?
Yes. So the question is, what about ask about premonition? Is there a biblical truth about this, or is it just a super pagan slash superstition line of thought?
The word premonition is a feeling in your mind that something is going to happen.
Mm.
Now, those things can have a huge spectrum of explanations. For example, if you're feeling down and depressed, you feel something bad is going to happen. Whereas if you're in a bright spirits, then you think something is going to happen that's good. So that has nothing to do with biblical truth or pagan or superstition. Whereas if you're asking for specific feelings that people get into when they go into trances, that's a different picture altogether. And when you go into a trance, you can have premonitions of what will happen. In fact, the the effect or the source that you are connecting in a trance can definitely tell you what's going to happen later on. So, is the source good side or the not good side? If it is the good side, then we call it uh, what shall we call it? A vision. We can call it a statement of nudging from the Holy Spirit. These are the words we use. It's a good side. If it's not a good side, then we say, well, that is from the side that is speaking from a position that is supernatural, but from the wrong side. So when we say Biblical truth or not, we have to decide about that because these premonitions are real. It's not the question of whether it's biblical or not. We have to decide whether it is. So premonitions, I believe, are real. They happen all the time. But suppose it comes to me, I need to check whether the source is reliable source that will take me in the right direction or a questionable source that is pulling me in the wrong direction. Same thing with somebody else's premonition. When they start saying this or that, it could be pagan, it could be superstition, it could be biblical too. It is the Holy Spirit that may be moving that person to say what he's saying. So we don't judge only by the fact of premonition. We go back to find out whether the premonition might have come from a source that is questionable or from a source that's reliable, faithful, is in line with God's truth. Then we are able to say, okay, I'll go with that premonition.
Ooh. Okay, so Dr. Panda, before I ask this last question, that can open up another channel of
Of
question.
course.
Because let's just go past, you know, we're out here now, so let's just go. Um, let's just bypass this thing of we're going to bypass right now premonition. What about those who practice palm reading, and they say that they can predict the future based off of uh, various avenues or tools? Some say they can do it through looking at your hand or looking at other objects or whatever, and then all of a sudden something that they said to whoever came to get their services, oh, what they said actually happened. Um, Now, I'm trying to stick with the fact that we're saying science, philosophy, and metaphysics, but it's really, I'm thinking I find it difficult to not include
This is metaphysics.
the manipulation of circumstances in the lives of people to make those who are seeking answers in that way to actually take place. Um,
How would you put it simply? The focus of your question is
what do you say to people who actually walk down that line? And
okay.
yes.
I got it. So when you look at these things like palmistry, crystal ball, horoscope, anyone who wants to go through these avenues of finding out the deeper truth or inner truth or the real truth of the matter, they do have a great wish that they knew something that would help them change or kind of move their behavior in a certain way. I need to get this one. So, can I go and ask the person who's staring at the crystal ball to tell me what will happen? Can I go to the palmist? And you find them all over the world. People, read the horoscopes. I remember when we used to have newspapers in those days. Nowadays, we hardly read newspapers, but there'll be a whole column of horoscope.
Mm.
Depending on when you are born, this is what will happen this whole week for you. Now, why would you want that? And whether those things have really come true? There are two or three things we need to understand in this. Number one is like you say, by chance. Chance is always there. Anything can happen by chance. Number two, the way to write a horoscope is almost like a science. You write it in such a way that whatever happens fits into it. Even the smallest thing will become major because it was written in the horoscope. So if you believe in the horoscope, you've got into the mindset of that, you will agree that it has happened. But remember, if you just look at, for example, your birthday, My birthday is on this month. So there are only 12 groups of us on earth because we are in each month, right? So if you say you are going to have this and the statistics push you out of that, then how can millions of you have the same thing? Did you get that? How can millions, tens and hundreds of millions do the same thing as that one description for that 1 month? Everyone who's born in that 1 month will have this one, two, three, four. Really? All 100 million will have this one, two, three, four things? You see, the statistics itself tells you that there's something wrong with that kind of a prediction. You must state it particularly for an individual, and that's where palmistry is is more exact. It's a kind of a science, and even palmistry, they can only give you vague, big pictures. Some of them are quite impressive. There's no question about it. I was, for example, I was walking down one of the streets in New Delhi when there's a big crowd, and I wanted to see what the crowd was. It was a person who was saying, I can predict things through a person who is a medium, and the medium was lying on the floor, on the ground, on the floor, the sidewalk. And so he would ask the medium certain instruction or certain questions, and the medium would say, "This is it." And there was a guy next to me in the audience, and he had his money in his pocket, and every note, if you know, every bill, if you look at, has a very specific number. It's only for that bill. It identifies that bill. So he had his bill in his pocket, and then this guy asks his medium, "What do you want to tell next?" And he says, "Look, there's a guy with a green shirt out there, and his pocket has a certain bill, and the number is." He went on and told the whole number. And I was standing next to him. So naturally, he's the guy with the green shirt. So he pulls out he had a bill in his pocket. He pulls it out and looks at the number exactly what that guy had said. Exactly. I mean, it's about 15, 16 digit number. He was so shocked. His face just went white. He put his bill back in his pocket and just whammoosed at him. He just walked away. He was so stunned at it. So we do know these things happen. Of course they happen. But what we have to decide is, when these things happen, are we going to be impressed to check it out as curiosity? Because this is only curiosity. I know he's not going to tell me anything about what I should do to go from here to nirvana, or from here to heaven, or to here to paradise. He's not going to tell me that. So I might be kind of pulled into curiosity. And that's one thing people should not do. If you go in for curiosity, there is such a snag there that you will most probably not get out of it. Don't do anything out of curiosity. Check it out first, then you go. Remember, there are good spirits out there, there are evil spirits also out there. They can do a lot of miracles, amazing things. And it's more, I think, in the West, in the third world countries, far out in the boonies. There are a lot of them. They really happen. When stories come to us, we should be able to make a good standing. And the only way you can make a stand is if you know what is in the writing. That's why we started with the writing today. If it is solid, if it is sturdy, if it's historical, and if that information came from the other world, then let's get to know what's inside there, because that will be our safe path. So that's what I'd leave with you.
Thank you so much for your answer concerning that. And Michelle put in the comments, that's why Jesus said in Matthew 24, basically, don't go investigate.
Don't be curious.
Yeah.
If you are challenged, however, that's a different matter. I still remember when I was in South Africa, there was a family that asked us for prayer because they were being harassed by an evil spirit
Hmm.
which came to the house at 12 midnight. Please come. That's not out of curiosity. That's a challenge. So when the pastor asked me, "Would you like to go?" I said, "Look, if that's a challenge, we take it up in the name of God. We're not going to there just, piddle, just play around over there. No, we're going to sit there and we're going to call upon the name of the Lord at 12 midnight. That's what we did. Every night at 12 midnight, that whatever that spirit would come and rattle this place and bang this door up and make everyone so scared. And their girl would, who was about, I think, 12 years old, she would froth in the mouth, and they said, "Please do something." So the pastor and I went there. I didn't confront the spirit, but we were there. We were ready. I was ready. I said, "God, if this spirit comes, I'm going to call on your name. I do not have the strength to fight him, but I will call on your name and I will do it boldly." So when we sat there, I still remember 11:30. Boy, you could see, feel your hair slowly rising up. Is something happening over here or not? But when 12 midnight passed, went to 12:30 and 1 o'clock, and nothing happened, the family was so pleased. They said, "This is the first night we've had peace." So, you know what I'm saying? I'm saying that do not go just because to be curious. But if there's a challenge, calling upon you to stand on God's word and in his name, then take the sword of the Spirit and go.
Amen. 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 Well, I want to thank everybody else for watching tonight. We've had another great program. We got a couple of announcements we want to make before we sign off. Guess what? Living Manna now, we have text alerts, absolutely, of when we are going to have our programs. So please, if you see it, text the number to LMOC to 84576. Text LMOC to 84576 and become a part of our Living Manna online church global family. So you'll get text alerts when our programs are happening. Mental Health Mondays, Tuesday, our health program with Dr. Kanisha Reynolds and Dr. Schweltz. Wednesday, our prayer with Terry Soul. And of course, on Thursdays, science, philosophy, and metaphysics, and all the other programs that we'll be having, including, of course, our Sabbath services on Saturday. So please, guys, sign up for those text alerts and be on top of what's happening. Also, many of you have been asking, hey, how can I find the previous programs for Dr. Pandit and the other ministry programs? They're all archived and ready for you on the YouTube channel, so they're there, as well as on the Facebook page, on the Living Manna Church Facebook page. But we're also going to set up a playlist. So this way it'll be easy for you just to go to, instead of going through all the dates, just you'll get a playlist for Dr. Pandit, a playlist for Mental Health Mondays, and so on and so forth. So it'll make it easier, and we'll try to make sure you have a way to, when you go to the Living Manna Church website, be able to click and go straight to our YouTube channels. And please be sure, if you are following you or just on YouTube, please like the Living Manna Church website. Thank you so much for sharing what we're doing here at Living Manna Church. And Lord willing, we will see you here. I'll see you here next week with Dr. Pandit, and we'll be back next week. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Have a great night, and we will talk with you later. God bless.
Patrice,
Yes, sir.
I wanted to just mention something.
Oh, sure.
I'm trying during these sessions to move us away from thinking as Christians. Because if you want to speak to non Christians, you cannot speak as Christians. So try not to put what I am saying into a Christian concept, into a Christian context. Just leave it there, learn that stuff, learn the information, and learn to use those words when you speak to others. How do you learn about the religions and other faiths? I'll tell you the simplest way. It is the easiest way. You don't have to have any training in it. Number one, find a person and simply ask them. Ask them about what they believe. Don't go to tell first. Just ask them, what do you believe? What do you think about this? Tell me about your belief. Tell me about what you think. But tell me about your ideas. Tell me about your language, the jargon that you use. That's the way we start a conversation. If we go only to tell, we will be able to reach a few, but we will not be able to reach the world. Whereas if we go to ask, we can reach the world. So the first step of the effective evangelism is not to tell, is to ask. Try that this week.
That's our homework assignment. Ask.
Yeah.
Have a great night, everybody. God bless you. And Lord willing, we'll see you next Thursday here on Science, Philosophy, and Metaphysics.